welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining today for the session. Today's session is on education policies that move young people, educators, and communities forward. Again, my name is Kathleen Newell. I'm the Education Program Manager with the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh. I'm excited to be here with everyone today for this exciting discussion. This is day 3 for the Council of our Redefining Global Learning Summit. And we have many more lively discussions and opportunities to network with peers later today and tomorrow. So if you're still interested in joining more sessions or additional sessions, please visit our summit webpage, which is linked in the chat for the times and additional information for all of those upcoming sessions. This is our first entirely virtual gathering, and we were able to put on such a big event thanks in large part to the generation of the community that supports us so much. So if you are able to support the council, please visit worldpittsburgh.org/donate or connect with one of our team members via the chat in a private message. No matter the size of the gift, your gift has a true impact on the global learning opportunities here in the Pittsburgh region. So we're grateful for your time and for all of your support. This session is being recorded, and you'll receive an email afterwards with a link to the recording, a survey, and additional resources. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel to be notified of all uploads from the summit, and you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So I have the honor this morning of introducing Salim Gerbil. He's the Executive Director of Pittsburgh Promise, the moderator for today's conversation, along with James Harris, who is the Superintendent at Woodland Hills School District, Sunana Chand, who's the Vice President of Systems Reinvention at Teach for America, and Khatija Aladdin, who is the Head of Community at 100. As you can see, we have a great group of experts here today, and we want you to be part of the conversation as well, excuse me. So please submit your questions during the conversation via the chat box. And at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Salim. So Salim, please take it away.
Thanks, Kathleen. Hello, everybody. So great of you to set time aside for this conversation today. It's an honor to be with you. One of the greatest honors of my life is that I get to serve the mission of the World Affairs Council by being a member of their board. And delighted that today I get to be a part of this conversation. Many of you who are attending are dear friends and respected leaders, and it's a little intimidating for me to have some of you on this call because obviously you bring an awful lot of experience and brilliance. So thank you. Thanks for joining us today. I'm humbled by that. I'm going to have us begin by asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves. And in random order, I'm going to start with the person who's farthest. Well, I guess this is not random. I'm going to start with the person who's farthest away, who called in from a different time zone and a different country altogether this morning. Khatija, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Salim. I am so happy to be here. I'm calling in from Calgary, Alberta, Canada right now. So great place to be. Excited to be back in Canada. My name's Khatija Aladdin. I work as the head of community at 100. And for those of you who don't know 100, we are a not-for-profit organization based in Finland that helps improve education by identifying impactful and scalable innovations. So I've actually recently transitioned into the role of head of community, but for the past 2 years, I've been mostly researching and looking at innovative and scalable practices from around the world and helping them spread to different corners. So really excited to be part of this conversation.
Good to have you here, Khatija. James, do you mind going next?
Sure. I'm James Harris. I'm the superintendent of Woodland Hills School District. We're a suburb, I guess, right outside of downtown Pittsburgh in Allegheny County. Have about 3,200 students right now, and this is my 3rd year in lovely Allegheny County, where there's still steel mills and cold weather, and it's wonderful. But since joining Woodland Hills, my main purpose for actually coming here is to make sure that the students have every opportunity available to them that they wish. And that's my sole purpose in what I do here. I'm not on any mission to do anything in particular. I just want to make sure that every student here, when they leave, they have every opportunity still available to them. And that's how me and my staff operate every day.
And we've been observing the great work and the excellent leadership that you're providing at Woodland Hills.
Thank you.
To have you in this part of the world. Sunana, Take it.
Hi, first of all, hi Salim. It's good to see
Hey, Sananda, great to see you again.
it's wonderful to be back, even virtually, in the Pittsburgh community. And
Where are you right now?
I'm actually currently in Massachusetts. So Betty said you're waking up early. I'm not waking up that early today. At least as early as all of you. It's an honor to be here, both in the presence of these other panelists, but also so many people in the audience who are incredible. As Salim said in the beginning, just incredible minds in education, from Greg to Tyler to Dr. Lane, to just so many others on this call. Thank you for being here. So my name is Sunana. I am currently in service of reinvention at Teach for America at something called the Reinvention Lab, which was created in August 2019. Our motto, inspired by Grace Lee Boggs, is transforming ourselves to radically transform learning. So we are trying to amplify and accelerate those who've been doing work in complete transformation of learning for a very long time on the ground in communities, and being of service and support, and then also, learning lessons from those folks and trying to transform ourselves at Teach for America, the systems, structures, and things that we do at the organization. So I'm really proud to be here and honored to be in all of your presence.
Thanks for joining us, Sananda. As the conversation emerges this morning, we will, of course, dig into matters of pertinence, whether it's policy, whether it's developmental places where our kids are finding themselves, whether it's challenges that we're dealing with, governmental matters. But I want to ground this conversation in a little bit more of kind of an existential thing where each of us currently find ourselves. So I'm going to pose a question by kind of setting the stage for it. Okay, so it's an understatement to say that COVID has changed our lives and all of our lives, and certainly the way we do our work. That's truly an understatement. Now, I remember very vividly back in February hearing about this virus that is emerging, and it was just kind of this thing that was pretty far away, and the reality of it didn't feel like it mattered to me in Pittsburgh. That was in February. Early March, it started to feel like maybe we ought to be paying attention to this, but the severity of it didn't quite, for me at least, didn't sink in. But I remember when it truly sank in, and that was on March 11th, 2020, when some of my colleagues who have family members who work for global companies that are in the technology world, and they were just kind of much more in tune with what's happening. And in those conversations, it's just like, this is real, this is dangerous, this is coming our way, this is going to be more than just disruptive. This could be a derailment for much of what we're trying to do. I remember on December 12th calling a staff meeting and telling everybody that we're going to shut down and everybody's going to go work from home. And on December 12th, they gathered their computers and their phones and whatever necessary files they needed, and we worked out whatever technology had to happen and sent everybody home on December 12th. I continued to come to the office. I'm the only one in the office because mail had to get picked up and checks had to be deposited. So one of us needed to come and do that. Then I had a meeting the afternoon of March 13th with a couple of other folks. I didn't cancel that meeting, went home on the 13th. And then I got a call that afternoon from a person with whom I met the previous day who tested positive. And that person was at a dinner gathering with the very first known case of COVID in Allegheny County. And I happened to have met with them the day after their meeting. And so like, okay, well, now this is very real. I did not test positive, but quarantined, for 14 days and did this. So kind of like it was this evolution from, okay, this thing to crap, this is real and this is powerful and this is here and this is impactful and this is disruptive and this is derailing. Okay, so the three of you, and this time we'll start with you, Sunana. When the reality of the virus became real to you, what were your immediate concerns, specifically about the populations that you exist to serve?
It's a really good question, Salim. And when you ask that question, the first question that I think of is which pandemic? Because I remember, canceling travel in March. I remember when schools started to get shut down across the communities that we serve, and all of that happening in March. I also remember at the end of May going out and protesting in crowds of people when George Floyd was murdered. I remember closing my windows in August in the heat of the summer because the fires were so bad in California that I couldn't open my windows or else we'd have toxic smoke in our apartment. And I remember worrying about my little nieces in California who were breathing in toxic air. So when I think about systemic racism, the hypervisibility of something that has always existed in this country, when I think about the pandemic, when I think about the environment, I feel like it's come in waves of realizations over the course of this year, and each wave of moments helps me understand the specific moment that I'm in right now, if that makes sense, and helps me contextualize and understand every single moment that I'm dealing with. Just this week, we work with a lot of young people in high school, and it's amazing how many of them and their families have been affected this week in terms of, the heightened COVID, wave that we find ourselves in now. So it hasn't been one moment. It's been kind of, waves and waves of different moments. And I think what I think about with that is, at the beginning of the COVID pandemic and, throughout this year, I've been thinking about how Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks need to be the ones leading whatever change comes out of this, out of this year. And because systemic racism doesn't work in silos, they are also most affected by all of these pandemics, right? And so that's what I've been thinking about and deeply kind of sitting in this year, and don't have any answers, but that's what I've been thinking about.
Thanks, Sunana. That's very real. James, do you mind taking a stab at it?
Well, for us, I could tell you for me and my district, just like you said, Salim, we saw the wave coming. And I'm from Philadelphia, where I think the first PA case was in Montgomery County, right outside the city, which is the most affluent, wealthy county in the state. So we knew sooner or later it was going to hit Allegheny County, just not win. And then as the weeks progressed, the team and I started to say, okay, if things are shutting down over in Allegheny, Philadelphia, Chester County, Delaware County out in Philadelphia, it's going to hit Harrisburg, it's going to hit Cleveland, and slowly it'll hit, the Pittsburgh area. I knew we had a little buffer because we were a little further away from some of the big epicenters, but it would hit here. So we started planning on what we would do, and we agreed that we would have to do remote learning. But we, like many other funded districts, didn't have all the technology needed to go 100% virtual. So we agreed that we would do the best we can, and that was creating paper copies, files, and things, worksheets to get packets, to get the students to take home and work with teachers to somehow email them to us or scan them or do something like that. On March 13th, I think the next day we had a meeting planned to go over training for teachers when the governor shut everything down. And the shutdown was, okay, about 14 days, you'll shut down and come back. Well, that, we got maybe 10 days into it. They extended it. We hit May and we're like, we're not coming back. So we need to do something. And there was a lot of confusion under the Department of Ed, who should you teach? How should you teach? Philadelphia got in trouble for saying we're going to continue teaching when if you couldn't reach every student 100%, you were in trouble. And when we were in the same situation, so we just kept going. But we realized over the summer, we still work with students in summer school and things like that, just to get them still engaged. And we looked at, okay, what if we don't come back? So we looked at July 4th weekend, there's a spike. Looked at, Labor Day, and there's a spike. So we just said, let's keep everyone remote. And our high school principal, who's fantastic, Dr. Woods, reached out through his social media channels and said, we need help at Woodland Hills. And he raised about $250,000 in 4 weeks. And those funds were used to buy Chromebooks and technology and hotspots for our students who, unlike some districts, didn't have that technology, or we realized there was a gap in just the technology availability in households. So we were able to get all of our students who needed them devices, and we retooled our district to be 100% virtual. And some districts around here in Allegheny try to do a hybrid where they come in for a few days, they go home for a few days, or half the kids are in. We realize that schools are meant to be social, not physically distant. So we decided to make the best program we could to be virtual. And so far we've been very successful with that. And we just recently had to have all of our teachers teach from home because of the high number of COVID cases that are happening in our buildings among the adults. And from there, that's where we are right now. But we've been pretty successful right now by teaching remotely and helping keep the cases down. But now we're getting into sports, so which people are debating, how can you have basketball and football and you can't teach kids in class, which is a whole other conversation.
Thank you, James. Khadija, how did the reality of the multiple pandemics existentially hit you?
Yeah, it's been so interesting to hear the other two panelists. And just like James had said, kind of because I work on that global scale, hearing these success stories and how teachers and schools have been able to adapt has been really inspirational, and just at the quick rate that these challenges have occurred. And all of a sudden, it seems like overnight something has been done. Working on that global scale, it's been interesting talking to our innovators, and innovators are kind of organizations or people who are doing great work in their areas and serving specific communities. So immediately at 100, we wanted to know how we could best support their work through this change and this challenge and adapting, because in some contexts, these organizations were all that the children had or the teachers had to kind of promote and continue that quality education for all. So for us, I mean, what came out of it was trying to identify these really easy to use practical solutions that teachers, students, and parents could use immediately tomorrow in their classroom. And that's kind of how we try to best support, by offering these solutions and these practical ways that they can continue that quality education throughout the different challenges. And I know at the beginning, talking to these innovations and innovators on how they were feeling, it was very hard, because of course we wanted to help as much as possible, but a lot of the organizations didn't have that foundation in place to provide that remote and online learning, or just that distance learning, because in some cases technology was not available. But sitting here now today, and it's been quite a few months from the first kind of wave of challenges and pandemic, it's been amazing to see these success stories and how people have come together in our community and as an education community as all, and handled these challenges.
You know, stay on, Khadija, because I want to follow up on this, and then we'll go down the line with our colleagues. You know, all of us want kids to flourish. All of us want to fuel and the fire of their curiosities and their imaginations and their aspirations and their dreams, and help them be equipped with the tools that they need to absolutely experience flourishing. You ended your comments by some success stories. So tell us, please, how some of the people you know in the world in which you live and operate responded to these multiple pandemics creatively to help the flourishing of kids.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's been quite a few that have come out, but I'll just kind of share a few examples. So there's one innovation in India called Slam Out Loud. And the whole premise is to work with underprivileged students and in rural areas, and kind of help them through poetry and art and expression, identify their own stories and kind of take ownership of what's happened to them, and also kind of proceed forward and succeed in life. So what they've done is they've created a program where they're now sending resources, lesson plans, voice notes through radio, and also through phones to the parents to kind of continue that. I think that's one trend that I've seen really emerge and that's been so successful, is actually the use of radio and phones to kind of connect education with the parents. And what's come out of that is parents are more engaged in education because they're provided with a lesson plan that they can use and interact with their students, whereas before they weren't necessarily involved in that education aspect. There's a few others. So one thing that actually came out of our 100 community is called Link Online Learners. So it was a group of our 100 ambassadors who came up with this premise, and just kind of the title said, to link the online learners and create a safe space in a global community for students to share what's happening in the world, what's going on with them. And it was interesting because, of course, they're in different corners, but they can all relate on some foundation that they're all having these challenges coming up. And the way that they're able to support each other is really powerful and beautiful. And one other that I'll just mention is Brac Remote Play Lab. So they have a great humanitarian play lab premise that is in Bangladesh and really, really crucial to supporting early childhood and early years in refugee areas. So they've come up with a model to provide that remote learning and create that safe space for play that is so crucial in the early years, and maintain that through the social distancing. So yeah, that's just a few.
Great examples, inspiring examples. Link online learners makes me want to laugh out loud.
Yes, I think there was a connection there.
Yeah. So even the old man here picked up on that. James, you cited the principal of your high school as one who demonstrated creativity and proactivity and resulted in raising $250,000 to support kids. Another inspiring example. I'd love to hear a little bit more about where you have seen people step up, teachers, principals, staff of whatever kind, parents, neighbors, community folks, to support the kids of Woodland Hills.
Well, there's so many, and I'll go back to the high school principal, Dr. Woods. I mean, when we both arrived to right around the same time, we knew the image of the district. So we really worked hard, particularly him at the high school, on establishing ways to communicate what the high school day was like in that building. People thought it was like a war zone, but it really wasn't. It's just a general high school that got a lot of bad publicity, some to its own doing and some not. And when he went through his social media contacts and just put out, hey, Woodland Hills needs some help because we don't have that technology to communicate with our students or connect with our students at the end of the day or now that we're shut down. It was, I think he started it on a Friday. By Saturday morning, he called me, he goes, hey, Jim, I got a problem. I collected $3,000. People want to start sending money electronically, but I don't have a way to do that. So I was like, okay, well, let's talk on Monday. He was like, cool. So Saturday night, he called me. Yo, dude, I got like $7,000 now. What do I do with this money? I said, okay, fine. We'll talk to the business office on Monday. Sunday, he calls me. Yo, I got $15,000 and people want to send money from, Seattle, San Francisco. I said, okay, well, we'll set something up. My board president calls me. Are you guys doing a fundraiser? I'm like, well, kinda. He just put it out to his thousands of contacts. And by Monday, it's like $20,000 are coming in. I mean, they're flooding in. So we reached out to our foundation who set up to collect money. And together we started looking at these things. And every day we would get, $10,000, $15,000. Corporations started calling, how can we donate $5,000? How can we help? How can we help? How can we help? And a lot of times what happens is one of the worst things in schools is all the volunteers show up on the same day, but you have nothing for them to do. And then they get turned away. So we didn't want to have that happen. And we knew that every dollar being donated was in response and in support of the positive things that we had been doing for the last 2 years. Because in years past, nothing would have been delivered or donated. So we worked with the foundation, set up ways to do these things. And then the foundation called and said, okay, we have $100,000 now by the end of the week. What the heck? Now, what did you guys do? And it was really through the broader social network that people were seeing and believing in our mission and our vision on how we turned a district around, or we're turning it around. So in the end, we had to stop the fundraiser because it was just ongoing. But through that, the golden lining in all this COVID stuff that's happening was it put a spotlight on the underfunded urban schools and the gap of the wealthier suburban schools and their resources, and also the life-changing needs that schools provide, like mine, to our students, where we provide mental health supports, we provide food supports. Many of our families have food insecurities, so their 1 or 2 or 3 meals a day come from schools. Their mental health counseling come from the schools. Their social interactions come from the schools. Sometimes their best, safest part of their day is in the school. So that was immediately cut off on March 13th. And hopefully, in the fall, they could come back, but it didn't continue. So we were like, okay, how can we continue these supports that we provide when the students aren't there? So we set up mobile networks of food delivery, for mental health, for counseling, just safe places. Some of the areas developed pods where kids could actually come into small groups and learn together. But it also, during this COVID, showed parents that you just don't drop your kids off at our door at 7:30, then pick them up at 3:30. It created a greater or broader engagement with families in working with their children. And some of the staff didn't like that. They like working in their own bubble or silo, but it helped connect the families, showing how their students or their children were learning and how they're learning, and to help, participate in their learning, where at times there was a disconnect, there is a disconnect, where they just drop them off in the morning and pick them up at 3:30. And I think we're a much stronger district now because of COVID, because one, it forced us to invest in technology that we would not have done if not for this situation, because we just kept going with our status quo. But now, moving forward, once this has all ended, we will have a totally different educational platform and delivery system that we only dreamt about years ago.
True. Circumstances like this sometimes create opportunities.
Yeah.
So Nana, I want to weigh in on this. You're muted, by the way.
I just am in awe, Superintendent Harris. Congratulations on everything you and your team have done. Worth sitting in that for a second.
Well, I see a question in the chats from Linda Lane. I was on a conference a couple months ago, or weeks ago, I don't know. The question goes, how about attendance? Well, we all know there are always families and students who are not engaged, and there are those that are engaged. What we did was make sure that every student had a device who needed one, and that if they're not signing in, we have social workers on staff who make contact with those families to make sure. And sometimes people don't ask for help when they need it because they're embarrassed. So we looked at other metrics to see if they need help, like right where are they signing in? Well, if they weren't signing in because we gave them a Chromebook, they didn't have Wi-Fi at home, they didn't have internet. So we gave out a hotspot for them. And instead of putting people on the spot, we just offered it to everyone. And there were some families who turned the devices down, then realized, you know what, I really do need a device. And I said, no problem. So myself, the principals, the directors, we all went to people's homes and delivered the devices because they didn't have vehicles to get to someplace. So we just have to make sure that the students that needed help, like we had a number of English language learners who couldn't learn remotely. So we did open up some of our buildings to bring them in. And we had volunteers to work with those students. So they were actually working in the cafeteria or a meeting room with someone there to assist them through the system on learning. We have about 100 emotional support students who by no way could sit at home and learn on their own. So we brought them into the buildings and we created, safe places for them with professionals working with them in supports, mental health, education, behavioral supports, working with them so that they would not be left behind. And because we realized back in March when we shut down that those were the populations that were left behind. Those regular ed kids, some special ed kids who have the resources are going to be fine. The parents who understand the math, they're going to be fine. But there are some families where there's a gap where if they're not in the building in front of a teacher, they're not going to be learning. We make sure that they take their medication. There are some families that turn the medication delivery over to the schools. So we had to make sure all those things were in place. So that's where I think we stepped up where others may not have. We recognized that there were gaps and that all of our students weren't equal, but we needed to make sure that there was equity across. So those English language learners, emotional support students, they were not left behind. And that's what equity is. We didn't do the same thing for everyone, but we made sure that everyone got the necessary supports that they needed to be successful.
Nana?
Yeah, just I'll be real quick. There were 3 organizations I wanted to shout out in response to your question, Salim. I saw someone, and I'll put them here in the chat. I saw someone studying Indigenous education, Indigenous communities. The Liber Institute is working on Pine Ridge Reservation. They originally had an idea to do a youth adult partnership, youth power for Indigenous youth programming throughout the year in person on Pine Ridge. And when COVID hit, and particularly hit reservations really hard, they switched and did it virtually. And the goal was for young people both to step into their own leadership and design power to influence government and their schools, but also to build community. And what they've done now is brought in, because it was virtual, it allowed the opportunity to bring in Indigenous youth from, Oklahoma to South Dakota to Nebraska, from all over the country. So in some ways, the virtual can also open up new opportunities. I know in places like Big Picture High School too, they do internships and have said, well, now I can do internships all over the country, all over the world, right? Empower Community High School in Aurora, Colorado has started something called the Hustle Collective, where they provide, actual physical materials, imagine that, to young people in their schools to do things like audio recording, to do things like learning how to plant gardens and learn STEM through gardening and all this kind of stuff. Whatever the young people want to learn, they're in control of those funds. It's about $50 to $100. And then they purchase materials, learn something on their own through their own interest-based learning, and then teach it to their peers. And so it totally turns kind of this virtual learning on its head into a more project-based, interest-based, youth-driven experience, which has been really, really cool to see. And then the Pritchard Committee in Kentucky has mobilized literally thousands of young people in this time virtually to both survey young people, do a lot of research about what young people in Kentucky are feeling and thinking about right now, and then create basically structures to lobby the state government on, how do we not go back to normal? How do we make sure that learning in Kentucky is dramatically changed after COVID based on the deep feelings, understandings, power of young people in the state? And so those are just 3 examples, but some incredible ways that folks are doing work right now, even in this virtual world.
Great examples. Thanks, Anana. So, okay, I'm going to pose a question now, and I'm not going to call on anybody, and I'm going to give it just 5 seconds, and then I'll call on somebody if somebody doesn't jump in within the first 5 seconds. So imagine a football field for just a minute, and it's football, Khadija, in the US is different than football in the rest of the world. So we're talking American football here. So imagine an American football field. It's obviously much easier to score a touchdown when you're 10 yards away from the end zone than if you are 90 yards away from the end zone. And all of us know kids who are close to the end zone and they're ready to score their touchdown, and many kids who are pretty far away from the end zone, but expected to compete with the kid who's just 10 yards away. So experiences like the one we're having globally right now, everybody in the world is impacted similarly by COVID. Much of the world is impacted by whether it's their own version of racism and ethnic bigotry, and then in the US, our version of racism and ethnic bigotry. The whole world right now is experiencing the same thing. And those who are 90 yards away from the end zone experience this much more severely than those who are just 10 yards away from the end zone. I'm going to continue with this for just a moment. Thinking about the kid who is 90 yards away. Experiences like COVID also create an opportunity, because everything is on pause and we're having to innovate and we're having to be entrepreneurial in the way we do our work and exercise our mission. So if we took full advantage of the opportunity that we have right now, which is an opportunity to innovate, how would we create schools with the kid who is 90 yards away in mind? What might the first thing we would do with that kid in mind? Knowing, of course, that we're not going to ignore the kid who's only 10 yards away, but for now, paying attention to the kid who is 90 yards away. Any ideas for innovations in our schools?
That's easy. Okay.
Nice.
That's easy. Okay, so Salim, okay, so back in the old days when we were in school, right? Every kid, 25 of them were in the class, and everybody was lined up in rows of 5. Okay, the teacher, usually a female in a flowered dress, stood in front of everyone and just lectured. And then at the end of that lecture, there was a test. Okay, and I remember first grade, Miss Galloway. I tell this story all the time. We were in math class and we were all doing, addition and subtraction. And she's walking up and down the aisles, looking at what we're doing. And this one student who sat across from me, instead of just putting, 2 + 3 = 5, whatever, going down, he was outlining his paper in the format that needed to be without answering any of the questions or putting numbers in. She tapped him on the shoulder, and I remember she said, "Bring your things with me and come with me." She took him out of the class, and we were like, "Where is he going?" And she left. She said, "Class, I'll be right back." She left and comes back without him and continues the class. I saw him 20 years later in Atlantic City at a craps table with some friends, and we recognized him. We said, "What happened to you? We remember you from first grade. Where did you go?" He said, "She put me in special ed." And we never saw him again until Atlantic City crap. Now he's much taller, all taller and older, but we remembered this kid. I won't say his name. We need not to assume every child learns the same. And what you're talking about is equitable distribution of educational resources. So what this has taught us is we need to make sure that we customize or tailor our delivery of education to students on a personal level. We all learn differently. We all receive things differently. Our mornings are all different. Some of us wake up, I need coffee. I need a muffin. Me, I made a pancake with raspberries and drank a cup of orange juice and watched the news this morning. So what we're setting up our schools are learning pods that, even though children may be in the same grades, they can receive information differently. Our teachers have to be retrained to be able to deliver information remotely, in person, asynchronous, non-synchronous. Some kids just have different needs and different times where they learn better. We keep saying in high school, "Oh, move the time back. Kids need more sleep." I have a 20-year-old and a 14-year-old. They would just stay up later if we move the times back. They're not going to get up any earlier. So we need to be able to deliver information to students on different platforms, but are on an equitable basis, if that makes any sense. So the kid in my first grade class, turns out he was gifted. He just did things differently. I've met kindergartners and first graders who are terrors in their class because they're bored. And when you give them more rigorous work or on a different platform, they're fine. They're not learning disabled. They just receive and present information differently. So it's not all one, for all. So that student who's 90 yards back, they may not be behind. They just may process things differently. And we need to recognize that. But we don't do a good job of that in public schools right now. So moving forward, the policy and the processes have to be adjusted to meet the needs of the student. If you remember Seinfeld, the soup Nazi, everybody lined up, he gave you soup, you got soup. If you asked for something different, he yelled at you. Schools cannot be like that. No regular business would be sustainable if they operated the way public schools continue to operate. It just wouldn't be possible. You chase all your customers away.
Of the 4 of us talking right now, James, you kind of sit in a unique place, and that is you are the one who's running a school district. The rest of us are parts of nonprofits. What role do relationships play in the education of children?
When I started in schools 15 years ago, totally by accident. I was never a school teacher. I have an MBA in business, marketing, and economics. And I opened a restaurant and I invited a new school superintendent to come in. from Indiana. We were in there talking, and he offered me a job in operations, and that's how I started in schools 15 years ago. My younger sister is a special ed teacher in New Jersey, so she has 20 years experience. So we bounce ideas off each other. Partnerships are usually important because there's expertise out there that the schools don't have, and I think a lot of times schools operate in individual silos, afraid to ask for input or advice. I came from a business background where we did partnerships all the time. So when I first got involved with public schools, first thing I did was reach out to the charters and private and parochial schools and say, hey, what do you guys need? Let's all work together. And they were shocked. And I still operate that way. That's why we were able to raise funds through our social network and our ability to connect with people outside of the area. I lived in Massachusetts for a while. I lived in Springfield, Massachusetts. I worked in Holyoke Public Schools, which was taken over by the state. And we brought outside folks in to help and retool and retrain. So you can't be afraid to develop partnerships and use outside expertise to make you stronger. And I think that's an arrogance sometimes that public schools have, where they don't like charter schools. Well, some charter schools are doing things really well. Some things are not. So we have to look at, okay, what are our competitors doing to be successful? I could tell you, when I got here, I rebranded the district, reconfigured the district to be more academically efficient, where now all the students who are in certain grade levels are in the buildings together. So that allowed us to move those grade level resources to the appropriate environments, not spread too thin. And reaching out to the experts, the foundation for fundraising. We started a fundraiser, but we're not experts at it. So we went to the foundation who's really good at it. We work with mental health folks. We have a few mental health providers, but they're more available here in Allegheny County, and we draw on their expertise. We look at how our tech companies, we're partnering with Google on how to deliver online instruction better, because that's what they do. We have textbooks, so how can Google help get us to the next level? And they're very happy, because I think a lot of these businesses and organizations call schools, but they never get a return call back. We always make sure that we call them back. And even if it's a small theater group, I love theater. How can you help us? Oh, help us design our new auditorium and make it better. What programs can we use? Come in and a lot of guest speakers, because we want to show the students what else is out there. When the president of Duquesne called and said, how can I help? I said, can I give a tour of your campus to first graders? Because they need to see the university, which they've never seen before. The college kids, we get a kick out of seeing the little, 6-year-olds walking around, but those students need to see what else is available to them, not just what's on their block. And those little things ignite sparks in our students and get them interested in what's next. And that's all we can do.
Great examples about collaboration and partnerships. Khadija and Sunana, bring it to the micro level, relationships with students. What role do relationships play with that kid who's 90 yards away?
I think I was actually a teacher before going to work with hundreds. So definitely relationships with students are kind of very close to my heart, because I think that a lot of the foundational skills are built upon a relationship, feeling comfortable in the classroom, in the learning environment, and kind of going back to your question about just that student who's maybe 90 yards away versus the one who's 10 yards. I think that we often think about kind of these traditional subjects like math, science, English, and that's where my mind goes, kind of like that student who's 90 yards away. Well, maybe they're not meeting the grade standards in math or English, but I'm really excited about bringing to the forefront these other really important subjects such as compassion, self-regulation, mindfulness, visual arts, music. So maybe that student who's 90 yards away is actually a great artist and really excels in that, and offering kind of opportunities for them to explore that. And going back to also the relationship between teacher and student, when you have that relationship, you're able to kind of identify the ways in which you can best serve your student and what they excel in and what's really necessary for them. And I'm hoping that with this change in education, we prioritize those skills that are so necessary that haven't been prioritized before and are very essential to a successful career. So just not getting the right grade in math does not mean you won't succeed in life, which I feel is sometimes kind of the message that we receive, at least from me as a student. So I'm excited about that moving forward.
Thanks, Khadija. Sunana?
The first thing that came to mind is some massive unlearning I've personally been doing this year around youth power. And I remember Tracy Reed Armont, who works at the Grable Foundation in Pittsburgh, always said to me, trust young people, trust young people, trust young people, particularly young people who've been oppressed by the school system as it was designed. And it never really came into focus for me until this year, where we're working alongside young people to distribute $1 million worth of grants to organizations who are doing future of learning work. And they're, making these decisions. And it strikes me how, and the decisions are different. I mean, it sounds simple, but to me it was a kind of a shock that, actually, involving high school students in decisions around major funding to learning organizations creates different outcomes and different results. It's just had me thinking about how infrequent it is that the largest stakeholders in the education system, young people, how infrequent it is that they actually have power. And so I've come to this thinking about going beyond youth voice into youth power and what that actually looks like and feels like, particularly in adult-driven organizations that are, say they're working for young people, and how do we make that switch from working for young people to working with young people and really deep co-creation in education spaces in and out of school. And so I think, the first thing that popped into my head when you asked that question, Salim, was how might we design co-creation with that young person, both on how they're learning, going back to what Superintendent Harris was saying around how each individual young person learns dramatically differently. So how can young people have more agency in how they're learning? How do they have more agency in what they're learning? How do we ensure that the curricula is not Eurocentric and really represents the brilliance, identities, and histories, cultures, depth of the beautiful identities that are in schools today? How do we ensure that young people are making real decisions in their education policy, in their finances, in the ways in which their education system is structured? And it's really hard. I'm speaking from a place again of I've had to do a lot of unlearning and learning, and it'll probably be a lifelong pursuit to combat my own adultism in a lot of ways. But it's been that's the first thing I thought of when you asked that question.
Unlearning and learning. All of us need to do a little bit of both. In about 3 or 4 minutes, we're going to go to questions that are in that chat box. But until we get there, which is just 3 minutes away, are there some policy matters that we need our governmental leaders to pay close attention to? Or if you could wave your wand and get your state legislator or your national leaders to do one thing differently, what's the one thing that you would want them to do differently? Jump in as you're ready, but no more than 5 seconds.
I think that back to equity again, different communities have different needs. And as long as there is appropriate funding and flexibility with policy, schools could be, more successful. It's also very difficult to get into education depending on the state you're in. Each of the states have different rules. So for me, as someone who never went to school for a education degree in college, there's a different pathway. But if anyone on this panel who doesn't have a teaching degree wants to become a teacher, I probably can't hire you, even if you're an expertise. For example, my brother-in-law is a chemist for the DEA. in New York City. He's an Air Force vet. He's about to retire from the Air Force, and he teaches part-time at Temple University in Philadelphia. My sister, who's been a special ed teacher forever in the Trenton area of New Jersey, would love to have him teach chemistry at one of her schools, but he can't get hired, even though he's, a decorated veteran teaching at the University of Temple University in Philadelphia, and been a chemist with the DEA for 20 years. Can't get licensed to teach there, but can teach at the university level. I can run my district with a business degree, but I can't teach business within my high school. So it's very difficult to get subject matter experts to become teachers because of the steps and the rules and regulations and policies that prohibit people in their 40s or 50s who may say, you know what, I worked at NASA, love to teach astronomy. Can't do it, but at a university they can. So how crazy is that? I can teach at a top university, but I can't teach at a high school. It's those antiquated rules and regulations and policies that have to change. And we keep saying we need more teachers, we need more teachers, we need more teachers of color, we need more diversity. Well, they're out there. I mean, I have 4 friends who are doctors. They cannot teach biology in my high school because they did not major in education. And 3 of them, they did a movie about them because they went to Seton Hall and they had the thing called the Pact, where they worked together to push each other through school. Another gentleman, he's Indian, one of my best friends, Drexel University, was an engineer major, switched off to biology, cannot teach at my high school. Great people, great citizens, great guys. So those things are the ones that are prohibiting outside folks from invigorating the education world, and that's a problem. It really is, because fewer and fewer people are majoring in education, but there are still people who want to be engaged in teaching that are prohibited. So that's something that has to be changed.
That's powerful. Yeah, there are some folks who are authorized to teach, but really they would serve the world much better if they were selling appliances at Sears. And some who are selling appliances at Sears would serve the world better if we allowed them into a classroom. Banana and Khadija, any comment on this?
Yeah, I thought that was so interesting. And even in my personal experience, kind of globally, as having an education degree in Canada, but I'm not eligible to teach in Finland or kind of any other countries. And as we talk about kind of global citizenship and introducing new cultures and language and kind of the richness of being and interacting with different people, I think I could also see that on a global scale, how powerful it would be to have teachers from different places of the world potentially teaching their language or their culture, and how effective that would be for students. I also think, especially after a year like this, teachers have done so much. They've just risen to every occasion. There's lots of demands that have been placed on them. So to find a way to better support the teachers who are doing such a great job and to kind of highlight their work in society, I feel like that would just really bring a lot of different opportunities. And one thing that I'm passionate about is teacher well-being. And I don't think we talk about that enough. We talk a lot about student well-being, what's great for students, but then what about the person who's there every day kind of facilitating that learning? I would love to see that talked about more at a policy level.
Thanks, Khadija. Last words, Banana?
Oh man, there's so many things. I'm gonna try and be quick. Okay.
One thing, pick one thing.
Oh man. All right, I might break that rule a little bit, but I'll be quick, Salim, I promise. Okay, so I've been thinking a lot. My colleagues Elizabeth Booz and Mike Yates have been talking a lot recently about, like, how do we challenge everything that we currently hold dear culturally about the education system. And I think one of those things goes back to Khadija, what you just said, like, we are seeing teachers do incredible things. We should pay teachers more. We are seeing firsthand the value that teachers have in this society. We should compensate that value in a different way than we currently do. And then also going back to what Superintendent Harris said, something about, making sure that there is equitable and fair funding. That means, unlinking funding to schools from property taxes, things like that, like really, really overhauling the way we think about how schools are funded in this country. in a more equitable way. And then the last thing I'll say really quickly is, how do we think about funds of knowledge that young people have that are not necessarily recognized inside of a school building? I think right now, the way we think about seat time, screen time, as it is right now, along the lines of like compliance and learning, does not capture, and standardized testing does not capture the full and holistic picture of what young people know from their families, from their communities, from their centers of faith, from their centers of community, like libraries, museums, out of school centers. Folks that knew me from Remake Learning will not be surprising to you. To know that, we should value a young person across their learning journey. And currently, our policies and systems aren't set up to do that.
You are such a rule breaker. An inspiring one. What we're going to do now is go to the question box, and my friend Olivia has been keeping a close eye on it. But then after a few minutes of responding to questions from you all, we're going to come back to the three panelists and give each one the opportunity to make a closing comment. Olivia, take it away.
We have some really good questions in the chat. So first I'll start with a question from Linda. And I can start with you, Superintendent Harris, and then I'll give everyone a turn to answer. A recent study shows that equity training does not really impact teacher bias. How should we deal with this?
Well, people have their own beliefs, and a class on training not to be biased isn't really going to impact or change anyone's lifelong prejudices and beliefs. It comes down to really the micro level, where it's incident by incident. And for example, I had a student one time come to me in the cafeteria, a senior female, two of them came and said, "Can we do something?" It was decorate their graduation caps. And I was like, "Yeah, sure." I had no idea what a firestorm that would set off with our staff, And as Sunana said, it's issue by issue. It's not a magic pill or a one-size-fits-all solution where we just flip the switch and it happens. And we're not going to give training and everybody, oh my gosh, I was biased. I'm no longer going to be biased. These are systemic, system in place, inequitable funding, inequitable hiring, throughout the whole network. And what has to happen is there has to be someone in there in that lane who says, "Stop, we're going to do something different." And there's going to be backlash. And I've done this, and there's backlash, there's protest, there's people showing up in red polo shirts protesting you because you want to let kids decorate their graduation caps because they have a bias, because it's going to be violent. Or it could be, if you look at the detention or suspension rates among a population, and how they see a 10-year-old girl, African-American, being adultified and applying the same rules you would a 25-year-old woman to a 10-year-old female or an 8-year-old boy. And you have to be able to step in and put a stop to that. And it changes incident by incident. So you create a new narrative, a new trend on how you respond to situations. There's no, oh, now we had training to do this. Oh, now I see I'm going to be a much better. No. It takes someone in a leadership role that person reports to and says, "You know what are you doing? This is not how we do things." And then support that over and over and over again. It takes between 2 to 3 years to create a new trend, a new narrative. It's not going to happen with one person being hired. They have to be supported, and they have to get buy-in. And it takes the others that are around them to step up also, along with their peers, to say, what you're doing is wrong. We need to change how we do things. And it takes time, but not too much time, because then nothing ever happens. So that's how I operate with my staff, where the people I put on the front lines believe the same thing that I believe in, and have the courage to step up and speak up and say, this is not how we're going to continue to do things. That's what has to happen at the end of this, or during this time, to make sustainable change.
Thank you for that. We have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to move to another question. So this is another question from Linda. She says that teaching is the heart of education, and effective teaching is essential for learning. How do we support teachers and help them grow their practice? And I know, Khatija, you touched on this a little bit, sort of focusing on teachers. Do you want to expand on that?
Sure. So, I mean, this is something that I'm also continuously looking into. And I think as kind of education changes and the demands for teachers change as well, we'll kind of see more coming out of this. I do think kind of ongoing professional development, and one thing that was mentioned before was kind of also the role of leadership. And that's one thing, at least in my research on innovations in education, one area that we're always kind of lacking is innovations targeted towards school leadership. So how to best support those leaders to then support their staff and the teachers in that school. So, I mean, it's a tough question. I definitely don't have the answer. It's an ongoing thing for me, but I'm really looking into types of innovations that help support teachers at kind of scale and are simple and effective tools. When I know, I'll definitely let everyone know though.
Superintendent Harris or Sunana, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I'll just say that, deep, personalized, customized, purpose-driven, love-driven, relationship-driven learning is not something that each and every young person needs. It's something each and every adult needs. And so often professional learning is the same kind of rote memorization, lecture-based instruction that has defined our, 20th century for 100 years education system. And so I think the same things apply. I think adults, teachers deserve learning that sparks their curiosity and their creativity, that is relevant to their work and to their life, that is interest-driven, that is that sparkles. I don't know. I think like there's that is collaborative, right, with their peers, that they lead and co-create with young people. And so there are so many examples of this that I could rattle off, even in the Pittsburgh region. But I feel like that's just so important that, Superintendent Harris said that each and every young person is an individual and deserves that learning. Adults do too.
I think we have time for one more. This is a question from Melinda, and anyone can answer this. We have 2 minutes. What are some changes in policies and practices that you foresee continuing after the pandemic, and how will this affect our concept of education?
I think, once again, we had to teach remotely. We had to get students and teachers used to a new normal. I think we can continue that and develop that into a hybrid model of learning, like many universities have, where it's okay to get out of the classroom. It's okay to do something online. It's okay to have a teacher in Japan teaching a class virtually in, Allegheny County, Pittsburgh. It's okay to do that. It's okay if I want to learn a language and the person's not in the classroom with me. It's okay. There's technology out there that we can engage and interact. I mean, if it wasn't for Corona, would we be in person right now? So I think a lot of things have come from these Zoom meetings and this virus that we could take away from and learn to do more. I mean, I love Zoom meetings. I have some peers who hate Zoom meetings, but we're able to have multiple meetings on this, hour back to back to back all around the world. This is amazing. And back in the day, we would have to fly in, get a hotel room, and wake up early, put a suit and tie on, and go to a room, where we don't have to do that anymore. We can engage just by sitting at a dining room table. So I think that is something that we could take away from and learn to develop more on and proceed with.
Thank you. Kath, I'm going to turn it over to you to close us out. Thank you for all those great responses to the questions. I'm sorry if we weren't able to get to your question. But yeah, Kath, it's on you now.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining. And we want to give a special thanks to Salim, James, Sunana, and Khadijah for taking the time to have this wonderful conversation with us. So we're so grateful that you were with us this morning, and we really appreciated all of your insights. So please be sure to check out our virtual feedback wall that Olivia kindly linked in the chat for everyone. Our feedback wall is for you to share your experience from this virtual summit with our talented council team. And we will constantly be monitoring it to make sure that we make improvements and soak up the things that you're enjoying as we present this event to you. So please keep posting. And as the wall gets busy, we're going to create more space. We hope to continue this conversation on redefining global learning and would love to hear your takeaways from today's session. So here's wishing that you stay connected and engaged and with lots of redefined learning. Thanks so much, and we hope to see you all in the coming days, and we hope that you stay well. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you
So much.